Hello, everyone. Welcome to Real Therapy Gone Wrong, where film real meets real. We are Lindsay Murray and Brandy Sellers, two sex therapists who point out the difference between Hollywood therapy and real life therapy. This show does not constitute a therapeutic relationship. Today's episode is Grey's Anatomy, Season 17, Episode 3, titled My Happy Ending. Brandy is going to recap the episode, and we will chime in as we go to comment on the therapy and other mental health issues. So, Brandy, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Lindsay. First, I want to say the episode title, "My Happy Ending," is an Avril Lavigne song. And when I was researching the title, I discovered that every episode of Grey's Anatomy is titled after a song, except for one. And that is the episode that was specifically about family violence. And the title of the episode is 1-800-799-7233, which is the domestic abuse hotline. So I
Oh,
thought that was a cool
wow.
bit of Grey's trivia.
Okay, cool. I did not know that. I was unaware that the episodes, aside for that one, were song
Me
titles.
too. Me too. The show always has a good soundtrack, but I didn't realize they took it to that level.
Mm-hmm.
Grey's Anatomy is in its 20th season, so I'll just do a little bit of Grey's trivia. It surpassed ER as the longest running medical drama on TV. Over the seasons, they've really addressed a lot of mental health issues like OCD, suicidal ideation, PTSD. Several of the characters have had major depressive disorder, domestic violence, and also mental health issues caused by lack of women's health care. So I think Shonda
Mhm.
Rhimes, the creator, has done a great job of incorporating mental health along the whole history of the show.
Yeah, I agree.
This particular episode opens with narration about COVID regulations. They're talking about masks and washing hands and the lockdown and all of that stuff. It kind of thrusts me back into thinking about COVID and lockdown. So I thought I would also give us some refresher of time frames about COVID.
Mhm.
I know we all remember that it happened, obviously, and it's still happening, but the actual pandemic was declared on March 11th, 2020, and it was declared officially over by the CDC on May 11th, 2023. Obviously, lots of people died. Over 3 million people, it is estimated, died from COVID. The two biggest states with COVID deaths were California and Texas, which makes sense because those have
Um,
the
yeah,
most
not
population.
not surprised at all. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and the CDC lists the current hospitalizations for actually just this past week at 9,345 in the US.
So it's still ongoing, which I think a lot of people assume it isn't. Like, oh, it's
Yeah.
over and we moved on, but we have not moved on. It's still very terrifying.
Yes. Um, yeah, I think it's easy to take for granted that it's over, but people are still getting diagnosed with COVID and dying from COVID.
Hmm.
The vaccine was first available for people 16 and up on December 11th, 2020, which I still think is amazing. So that's 9 months to the day after the pandemic was declared. They already were able to have a vaccine for it, I think is a really cool science nerd fact.
It's pretty incredible. I mean,
Yeah,
to not know what this thing is and then to make a vaccine for it all within the same year is pretty impressive to me. I was shocked that it came out that early.
totally. And also a good example of the world working together to make this happen. And also Dolly Parton giving $1 million, and we love her. Um,
Yes.
also, it was interesting as I was thinking about lockdown, like, I looked up the longest consecutive days of lockdown, and it was in Buenos Aires, and I think it was 238 consecutive days was the
Oh,
number.
wow.
Yeah, and then the longest lockdown days, not, consecutive, but just the longest number of days total was Melbourne, Australia, and also some cities in Peru and Chile had
Mm.
the most number of COVID lockdown days. So, okay, now we cut to the episode. We open with a speech by Dr. Weber, played by James Pickens Jr., giving a statement about COVID and the hospital being open and announcing that there are COVID tests for the entire staff. And that just made me think about the fact that, it took months to even get a test for COVID to know that that's what we were dealing with.
Mhm.
So this was, this great thing he's announcing that they can test the staff now. So then it cuts to a scene in the hospital COVID ward with everyone wearing precautions. And I don't know if you've seen ET or not. So for listeners, Lindsay is a lot younger than I am. I'm 50 and Lindsay's in her 30s. So some of the movies I've seen maybe aren't as popular with younger people. But in ET, when the government comes to like take over this situation, they're all wearing these hazmat suits with helmets. And like it's really scary if you're a kid watching that movie when they come. And that's what the scene was really like giving me
Yeah.
ET.
And it was also, you're right, kind of scary with all the hazmat suits and what they're wearing, but also too, he makes an announcement not only that staff can get tested, but that resident, like, patients in the hospital who are positive for COVID or whose test is pending, their loved ones will not be able to go into the room with them. And some of the hospital staff are like kind of like, what the hell? Why is that a rule now? There's frustration around that rule. I remember it's really wild that we have been alive during this, because I remember when that started. People were very upset, and rightfully, I understand both sides of it. I understand not wanting to spread COVID, but then if you have a loved one who's dying, you want to be in the room with them, but you can't be in the room with them. Lots of devastation around that decision, and I like that they portrayed it in the episode because that was very real.
Yeah. Yeah. So then in the next episode or the next scene, you see Meredith Grey, who's played by Ellen Pompeo. She's one of the three original cast members of Grey's Anatomy. Has COVID and she's in a hospital bed and she's really cranky about the isolation piece. But like you said, by now they know how transmissible it is and you have to be in isolation. There's just no choice. Then there's a scene right after that with a dying patient, and the doctors are stressed that the patients keep dying. And they're talking about treatments and, like, hey, I heard this works. And it really reminded me of how clueless, because it's a novel virus, how clueless they all were as to what would be helpful and all the things that we were hearing to try. Some of them were like ridiculous and but how they just really didn't know and they were relying on very small anecdotal stories and of what kind of treatments that they should give to their patients to try.
Mhm.
So Meredith collapses and they find her unconscious on the floor. And then we see this dream sequence with her on the beach, and this recurs throughout the episode. And honestly, I hate these scenes.
It's it's so cheesy. Like, it is so I don't even know the word to describe it. But every time it came on, I didn't enjoy this particular part of the episode.
Same. And so they bring back Derek, who's Meredith's husband. He's also a doctor. He was also known as McDreamy. He's played by Patrick Dempsey. I did not like him when he was on the show. I don't think he's aging well. I just don't like these scenes. But I think they should have just left him be dead. But
The
the idea is that she's like sleeping or maybe sort of dying, and you know
Mm.
how there are stories about when people are dying, they see people who have gone before, and I think that's what they're implying by these beach scenes.
It's
Then we cut
I'm laughing because he's like, the sand is not real. The sand is not real. And she can't like leave where she's at. And there's kind of the cheesy, like, sappy music in the background, and it's very overdone.
it is. There's even like they did that glossy filter, like, there's all like a slight blur, and anyway, it's ridiculous. So then we cut to the ER, and there's a woman in the ER with belly pains, and she is diagnosed with a surprise pregnancy, and that will recur throughout the show. We'll see her again in other scenes. But then we get to the scene that made us pick this episode. So we see a man lying in bed, and there are three doctors in the room: Dr. Avery, played by the ever so hot Jesse Williams, Dr. Link, played by Chris Carmack, and Dr. Helm, played by JC Elliott. And the patient, who is played by Kevin Fuentes, is watching something on a laptop and he's like giving instructions. And he asked the doctors, first of all, this is ridiculous. He asked the doctors to come back later because he says he's with patients. And I was just thinking, like, it's COVID and there are 3 doctors in the room, and you're gonna be like, "Could you just come back later?"
And also, what patient wants to see you while you're lying in a hospital bed? Like,
Right, right.
uh,
So then Helm is presenting the case, and the man has hurt his hand, and he asks how long he's gonna be out of commission because he uses his hand for demonstration in his work. And then we hear moaning coming from the computer. And Helm says, mute. And they realize that he is a sex therapist. So, what he's watching on his computer is a couple having sex, and he is in real time giving them directions on things that they need to be doing. And he says to the doctors, you make fun, but touch and pleasure is important, especially during a pandemic. So let's chat about this.
oh god, both hilarious and infuriating. Um, for anyone listening, that is not at all what a sex therapist does. Just to give clarification around that, as we're Brandy and I are both sex therapists. We would never watch a client have sex. We would never engage in any physical activity with a client. We would never see them without their clothes on. Sex therapists are therapists at the core. We are still bound by the ethical guidelines, just like any therapist would be. We just happen to specialize in the topic of sexuality, whether that means education, whether it means exploration, or whether it means like communication around sex. Honestly, the simplest definition I can give of what a sex therapist is a professional that helps you decide who you are as a sexual person, and that can mean something different depending on who you are and in the context of your relationship. So it's not at all what they depicted on screen. We would never do that, and even it was kinda disgusting him being like, "My hand that's broken is the one that I use for demonstration." I am not masturbating in front of clients. I don't know about you, Brandy, but
No,
I'm not
I am not either. No. Mm-mm.
but
Haven't, wouldn't, don't want to. And I don't want to see clients having sex. I think we might
no.
give specific suggestions, but they aren't, that would be like a pamphlet or, in verbal language, not specific suggestions based on having watched them have sex.
No, not at all, and we do not teach clients how to have sex. Like, I think that's kind of the biggest misconception is I'll go to a sex therapist, they'll tell me exactly what to do because even in the scene, I think the people on screen are like, "Doctor so and so, like, am I doing it right? Like, do you have any feedback for me? I'm not gonna watch you having sex and then give you feedback." Like, I'm not gonna it's not a how-to of how to have sex, but it's more so like if you have if there's like an educational component that I can provide to you, I will do that. And then I'll also walk you through, like, for any client that comes to see me, and Brandy, the same for you. If there's anxiety around sex, if there's dysfunction around sex, if there's sexual trauma, we will guide you on how to process that and how to like lower anxieties if that's a goal that you have, right? Like it really is all about the goal that the client has. And sometimes the goal might be someone who doesn't know like who they are as a sexual person, and maybe the outcome they have is this is just a very specific example, but it could be that they're asexual, that they don't want to have sex, and that's totally valid and real too. And so like coming to see a sex therapist sometimes isn't even focused on having a lot of sex. It's about maybe realizing I don't want to have sex at all, and can I accept that about myself? So it's very nuanced. And Brandy, you might have more to add to that definition because again, it's so nuanced and complicated to really describe what we do.
It totally is. I do want to point out though, like about in the scene when they're asking him, are we doing it right? I think one of the biggest things that we give our clients is the knowledge that if you've had sex with one person, you've had sex with one person. And everybody is going to want something different, even on a
Yeah.
different day.
Yes.
And that is why communicating during sex is the most important thing with your partner.
Yes.
Like, do we know things about sexual anatomy? Sure, but every single person likes different things. And so, this week I said in a session, communicating during sex is important. And that seemed like really surprising information. So I would like all the listeners to know that communicating during sex is really important. And just, there is consent at the beginning, like, are we going to do it or not? But there's also consent every step of the way. Well, what about doing this activity? Or
Mhm.
would you like to do this? And that we need to normalize that, and no person from the outside, whether they're trained as a sex therapist or not, can give you that information. Like, you gotta get that information from your person.
Exactly, and we help navigate those conversations if people don't know how to communicate. That's half of what my couples work is like, even that question, well, am I doing it right or is that the right thing to do? I'm not gonna have that answer for you. And also, there is I know this might sound radical, but this is honestly how I view it. There is no right and wrong. Like, wrong would be if you didn't get consent. Like, there's those obvious things, right? But as far as like, what's the right move? What's the right way to give oral? What's the right way to move when we're doing intercourse? There is no right because I'm not you or that other person. And
Right.
you're just I think people feel a lot of pressure and anxiety around, like, I got to make sure I get it right. And if you can remove that pressure, it opens up the door to actually receive and give pleasure,
For sure.
is
I
how
think
I
this
view it.
is This is one reason why feminist porn is important, because if you are using feminist porn, then you're going to see people getting consent. You're going to see both people experiencing pleasure. But if you're just watching like free porn on Pornhub or something, you're not going to maybe see that way. You're going to
Mhm.
see something that might be pleasurable for the male, but not really pleasurable for the woman.
Yeah.
The other things I was thinking about is, and going back to the scene in the show, is that it's really a HIPAA violation for him to be in a room with watching clients and other people to be in the room. So
Yeah.
that was upsetting. And also, there is a consent issue because these doctors did not consent to hearing these people have sex.
No.
So this little blip of a scene is really a failure all around
It's
as
a
to how it
yeah.
portrays sex therapy. Yeah.
It's a violation both ways. The clients didn't know there were going to be other people in the room, and the people in the room didn't know they were going to be overhearing this whatever
Right.
what was going on. It does remind me of just a quick funny story, like because when it comes to confidentiality in in therapy, I think um COVID has definitely changed the game because prior to COVID, we weren't really doing telehealth. I don't not to the scale that we are now. I mean, it
Right.
blew up. Like prior, 2019 and forward, or prior to those years, it was primarily in-person therapy. So you kind of have that safety of like the door is closed, you're in my office, there's no one else in here. Going to telehealth, I think a lot of therapists have been surprised thinking, okay, you and I are on a video, we're having a private session. Well, someone is in the corner listening to their session and you can't see them on the screen. Right? So it's even brought up that, like,
Yeah.
ethical consideration of how do you maintain privacy in the session when it is telehealth? Because the funny story I have is, one time I had a client log on for a session and, there were, like, multiple people in the car with them, and I had to say, like, "I can't hold a session with you while you're in the car with other people." So we didn't meet. But I just think I don't even, like, blame them. I'm just saying, like, there's other considerations to think of now,
Yeah,
post-COVID.
for sure.
Yeah.
So the next scene is testing outside the hospital in a makeshift testing tent. And I had kind of forgotten about like drive-through testing and drive-through vaccines and all of there's a makeshift morgue situation that will come up in a minute in the show, but it just really reminded me of all of the makeshift healthcare situations that we had to devise on the fly in
Mhm.
order to get care. Um, Meredith's sister Maggie in the next scene, she's played by Kelly McCreary, and Dr. Altman, who's played by Kim Raver, are discussing Meredith's care. And it's really emotional because everyone was dying and they don't know what works and what doesn't work. So we see this theme throughout the show of like not knowing what to do.
Mhm.
Even, these two people are like at the pinnacle of their profession and even they don't know what to do. So Dr. Avery and Dr. Link are prepping for the surgery on the sex therapist who they call him Dr. J in the episode. And Helm comes in and says he's famous in the Pacific Northwest for helping women have 37 in an hour. And so they're implying that it's orgasms without saying orgasms, and it really annoyed me because I was thinking, like, this is pretty much everything you need to know about the sexual health landscape in America, that they won't use the word orgasm on
Yes.
this primetime show, and sex is fun, and that's why people do it, and we could be explicit about that. And so the fact that they just beat around the bush, like 37 in an hour, and they just don't come out and say it, I thought was super annoying.
Yeah, because one of the other doctors is like, 37 an hour, is that his rate? And she's like, mm-mm, nope, that's not his rate. And then they're like, oh my God. When they, okay, my brain just calling him Dr. J, I just kept thinking Dr. Jackoff because he mentions his hand, his jackoff hand is broken or whatever. And I'm like, so Dr. Jackoff is helping women orgasm 37 times an hour, which no thanks. I don't know if I've ever had the desire to have 37 orgasms. Like a few is enough. I think it'd be done. Um, but also the annoyance, like you said, they won't say it. But then also going back to what a sex therapist does, the goals of sex therapy are not to reach some like sexual performance outcome. Like, my goal is to reach 37 orgasms an hour, and I'm going to show you how to do it, is very goal oriented, which is kind of the opposite of what we do.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
like that sort of joke, I know you heard it too because we were in the same training, but like the quickest way to not have an orgasm is to try to have an orgasm. If
Yes.
you're trying to have 37 orgasms an hour, that is like too much in your brain and not enough in your body to just be with the experience.
Well, and then you walk away frustrated because you're like, I only had 20. I just can't imagine a world where I'm like, I only had 35 and not 37. We're going to have to try again later.
Also, how did they even pick 37? I
I
don't where did that even come from?
I have no idea. Some record he said, or who knows.
Ridiculous. So the next scene is actually the scene I thought was the saddest in this episode. There's this new intern and he's doing desk summaries and he realizes that all the patients that he's writing about are dead and he just looks so devastated. And Dr. Karasik, who is acerbically played by Greg German, I just love him so much. He says that they all got transferred to the popsicle truck in the parking lot. And I had really forgotten about the morgue trucks. And we didn't
Mm,
really like I was in North Texas at the time and I know Lindsay, that's where you live. And I don't know that we really saw that where we were, but I know that in New
no.
York and other big cities that they had morgue trucks and
Mm,
that was just not a good reminder of how many people were dying all the time.
yeah.
So then we go back to the pregnant lady and they discover that her baby is attached to her liver, which I don't know how realistic that is. The baby is still alive. It's like 26 weeks. And they decide that they really have to deliver the baby that day in order to save the mom because it could make her bleed to death with her liver situation.
Yeah.
And I was really thinking about in this part of the episode, women's healthcare. And I had an ectopic pregnancy between my first kid and my second kid, and I had to have surgery for that. And at the time, because it was in like 2002, there weren't any rules about abortion or women's healthcare that would have prohibited me from having that surgery. But now, I was just wondering if the scene were true and this really happened in Texas or some of the other states with these strict abortion laws. Like, could this woman have gotten health care and what would that have been like?
I don't think she would have been able to here in Texas. I hate to say that, but that's the reality. I think like the view on abortion and the laws around it are so strict here that she would have had to drive to another state. And that's what people are having to do. I mean, I think people think abortion is just, well, I'm pregnant and I don't want it anymore. And so I'll drive somewhere. It's not that simple. It's, you could want the pregnancy and then you hear from a doctor, well, you also risk bleeding to death. So unless we do this surgery, and what if they do the surgery and the only option is to abort the baby? Like, then what? Then what do you do? Right? Like, here, you wouldn't be allowed to do it.
Right.
So it's really terrifying to think if you were put in that situation, like what would you do, but what would you even be able to do? I did look up the possibility of like the baby being attached to the liver and if that's how often that happens and could it still be alive at 26 weeks. It could happen to where the baby is attached to the liver, but the odds of them being alive that late in the pregnancy are super rare. Really,
Yeah.
really rare is what I looked up.
Yeah, even having an ectopic pregnancy where the baby is in the tube, which is where mine was, it was
Yeah.
not ever going to be a viable pregnancy.
Yeah.
But also, let's make clear that I know your stance and my stance is that women should be able to get abortions regardless of the reason if
Yes.
they do not want to continue a pregnancy. Um, but
Yes.
personally, if it
100%. Yeah.
yes, yes. So we're back to Meredith, and she's arguing with her sisters about medical power of attorney because she's basically said she doesn't want to be on a ventilator, and they disagree. So that kind of brings up the ventilator shortage and just making these healthcare decisions based on a disease or a virus that they don't even know, how to help. And then they show her having a video call with her kids, and that kind of goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, how people can't come visit. So she hasn't seen her kids, so she can only see them on video call.
Mhm.
And then we have another damn beach scene. And so again, she's like sleeping or unconscious. And she says to Derek, I miss you. And he says, I know. And I was like, that summarizes their whole relationship. He is
W-
just an ass.
Yes. Yes. He couldn't have said, I miss you too. Like, what the fuck are you
Right.
doing on the beach then?
Right. Ugh. So
Annoying.
I know. Then we cut to Dr. Bailey, played by Chandra Wilson. She's another one of the three OG characters on the show.
And my
And
favorite.
oh,
My
love
favorite.
her. And Dr. Joe Wilson, who's played by the actress Camilla Luddington, who I found out is British. It always surprises me that British actors and actresses can play and you do an English accent. You would never know that she was
No,
British.
I had no clue.
Right. Also, I discovered that she did the voice and motion capture for Lara Croft in Tomb Raider. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Okay.
So they successfully do the surgery to remove the baby from the liver of the mom, and the baby and the mom live. And the mom has named the baby Luna. So then we go back to our favorite sex therapist. He's in recovery. They make a hand joke, and he says he exercises his hands for 5 hours a week. And they all look shocked. And let me just say, if you are masturbating or quote exercising your hand for 5 hours a week, there's nothing wrong with that. Like,
No.
it kind of annoyed me that they even made a joke about it because you can masturbate for 5 hours a week and that's fine if that's what you want to do. As long as you're going
Yeah.
to work, it's not impacting your family duties, your activities of daily life, live it up.
Because them making a joke about it made it seem like it was abnormal, and
Right.
it's not abnormal. Actually, a lot of people probably masturbate that much. And then again, it's another scene where they won't just say it. They're not
Right.
saying, "Oh yeah, I masturbate." It's like I exercise my hand for demonstration. It's just this very roundabout way that we know what they're talking about, but they won't just call it out.
And I annoying. Yes. He does tell the doctors his secret to his work is asking people what they want and then listening. And I have to say, I think that's really good sex and relationship advice.
I love that part. That was the only part with him
Yeah.
where I was like, "Oh, that was great," because it otherwise, I was like, "Oh, no."
Right.
But that is a very succinct way of describing what he does with couples. I hear what they want and I listen, or ask them what they want
Yes.
and I listen.
I thought that was great advice. Um, After this scene, we see Dr. Link goes home and he's stripping the backyard because he's been in the hospital and he's got the COVID cooties on him. And then Dr. Amelia Shepherd, who's played by Katerina Scorsone, who I think is just precious and adorable. She comes into the yard wearing her bathrobe. And so they're standing kind of far apart. And she's been inside. She's been quarantining with these four kids and she's very overwhelmed. And Dr. Link tells her about the surgery and about the Dr. J helping the women have 37 orgasms. And she starts crying, and then she takes off her robe. And then it's implied that they have a mutual masturbation situation 6 feet apart in the yard. And kudos to Shonda Rhimes for that scene. I thought that
Mhm.
was amazing. I loved how they showed that they could get their sexual needs met without even touching.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really hot and cool.
Yeah, I agree.
And then it kinda gets back to another depressing scene, though, because Dr. Maggie and her husband, Dr. Ndugu, played by Anthony Hill, are on the phone, and she's crying about the death toll, and you could see it's just a moment where she is really devastated, and she says 53 people have died on her watch, and that it's mostly been Black women, and this scene in particular shows the toll that the pandemic was having on medical providers.
I liked that scene. It was really hard to watch. It made me tear up because I can't imagine how helpless you must feel as a medical professional to know that all of your training and your expertise and your efforts and the hours you put in, like you're trying your hardest and it seems like nothing is working and people are dying anyways, I think is the most heartbreaking position to be in. I think that's how a lot of doctors and nurses felt
Yeah.
during all of this.
So then we go to the last scene, which is a beach scene, and it's Meredith running toward Derek, and she falls down, and he laughs, and he says, "I'll be here when you're ready," kind of implying, I think, that if she's ready to die, he'll be there. And that is the end of the show.
I laughed so hard when she fell because she face plants into the sand. It's not like a little fall. It is like a trip and she kind of smashes her face in the sand. And then she's like, "I hate you," or she says something like that because he, I guess, was joking
He
about the
laughs.
sand not yeah, he's laughing and joking about the sand not being real. And it is funny to know the nature of their relationship because you're right, he's kind of an ass.
Yeah,
And I'm like, here he is just laughing at you falling in the sand, but he'll be there when you're ready. Mhm.
that's no prize. Spoiler alert, she doesn't die. So,
She does not.
yeah.
She does
So
not.
overall, I really found this episode hard to watch because I did not expect to have so many feelings about COVID and about just like it reminded me of a lot of things that were difficult to think about or experiences that were hard to be with.
Because we lived through it, which seems so odd. Like, I just think about, when I was in school and I was learning about, like, polio, for example, which I've not lived through. I don't know anyone who's had polio, but there was a time where a lot of people did. This time of our life is gonna be like that for future generations. They're gonna learn about COVID, and it's gonna feel so far removed from them, and it's pretty wild for me to sit here and go, "Yep, lived right through it, know people who have died from it, and here we are, not even a year out from when it officially ended." Is just kinda blowing my mind a little bit.
Yeah, well, and even though it officially ended, the people are still dying from it
People are
and
still,
being
yeah, like,
hospitalized.
it's still going
Yeah.
on. So,
I did
mm,
look up some mental health stats from COVID that I thought would be interesting to talk about and let people know about.
yeah.
Because other people might also have the experience of finding TV shows and movies that take place during COVID difficult emotional experiences. So, Pew Research Center did a lot of research. They did 4 different studies between March 2020 and September 2022. And when they put those together, it showed that 41% of US adults said that they had high distress due to COVID. Women was a lot higher. So it was 48% of women said that they did, and 32% of men said that they did. Not surprisingly, people of color had higher states of distress than white people. The highest age range, and this is only adults. So I do have some stats on high schoolers, but this is adults 18 plus. Adults that were 18 to 29 had the highest rate. Out 58% said that they had high distress. People with lower income had higher distress. Disabled people, 66% had distress. And those living alone had more distress than those living with someone, which, like, I have a friend who lives alone, and he and I would talk, like, almost every day. He would joke at the end of our calls, "Okay, I'll call you in 5 minutes." But people who live alone and people who didn't have pets and living alone really didn't get to be with other living beings, and that was caused really high distress.
Well, it goes to show that isolation is
Yes.
really damaging. We're not meant to be isolated for a long period of time, especially. And it's interesting about the like lower income people really being stressed because I think this is my theory. This is not research at all. So take this for what you will. But higher paying jobs tend to have the ability for you to work from home, and lower paying jobs where you're maybe like customer facing, all those jobs shut down for a while. So not only are you low income, you might quickly be out of a job and then you're scrambling what you're going to do. So now you're going through a pandemic and you're also trying to literally survive, which is so, I mean, it's got to just be a monumental amount of stress to get through. And if you're
Yeah.
isolated on top of it.
I did see some research too about alcohol and substance use increasing. And I actually just read a news article this morning in my town in Colorado, Fort Collins, and Colorado, has legalized marijuana. Whoop, whoop.
Mhm.
And but they were talking about rates of sales tax that were earned by the city. And during the pandemic, there were increased sales tax rates because people were buying more marijuana because, like, everybody was just looking to feel better some type of
Mhm.
way. Um,
A really sad statistic that I saw was that and again, take this for what you will. I don't have the exact dates. I don't know if this goes over the whole like 4 years that we've been in or if this was like maybe the first 2 years of COVID, but the amount of child abuse reports went down, but that doesn't mean there was less child abuse. It means there was less of an opportunity to report because you couldn't leave home.
right.
And that is so eye-opening to me and also very sad to
For
think
sure.
reports are going down because we quite literally we can't report and then be stuck at home with our abuser.
Well, also teachers, if the kid isn't in school,
They
teachers won't
don't
see
see
that
it.
there's abuse happening and be able to report it.
Mhm.
So, also regarding high school students, over a third of high school students said that they felt hopeless and had distress. And girls and LGBTQ populations had the highest distress, higher than boys. Also, this was a really sad statistic. 57% of high school girls felt hopeless almost every day for at least 2 weeks in this study. And
Mm.
again, this comes out of Pew Research, and we'll put the studies in, we'll link them in the show notes.
Yeah.
And then the last one I have is this is interesting. So this is from March 20th, 2023, and this is Kaiser Family Foundation. They did a study that showed that 90% of adults believe that our country is facing a mental health crisis. And as a counselor, I agree with that. I don't know if that is your
New?
experience.
I don't know if that's new. I
I
think
think it is
we
increased.
yeah. Oh, increased for sure. Increased for I mean, I think COVID and the isolation, but also the grief of people dying that you know has for sure increased it. I think it's also highlighted the fact that we've been in a mental health crisis a lot longer than we even know.
For sure.
Mhm.
Also, to that end, we'll put in the show notes some resources to find therapists, but Therapy Den is a great therapist directory. There's also one called Secular Therapy Project that I want people to know about. And that is for people who are looking for therapists who are not religious and who will not do things like tell you to pray as part of your counseling plan.
Mhm. And Brandy and I are both on both. We're both on Therapy Den and Secular Therapy Project, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's what I thought.
Open Path is another great resource. That's for counselors who might have openings and they may have a reduced rate of like only $50 a session. Also, local graduate school programs often offer free or very reduced price counseling. There's another directory called Kink Aware Professional. So if you're kinky and you want to make sure that your therapist won't kink shame you, that's a great directory. Also, ASECT, which is AASECT, American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. Lindsay and I are members of that group, and they also have a directory on their site of certified sex therapists. So if you're looking for sex therapy in particular, that's a good resource. But we'll put all that in the show notes.
Yeah.
Okay, if you enjoyed this episode of Real Therapy Gone Wrong, please like, review, subscribe, and follow us where you listen to your podcasts. In our next episode, we will discuss the movie Prince of Tides, which is a movie that tons of people have told me we should do. It stars Barbara Streisand, and it can be streamed on Apple TV or Prime Video. If you'd like Real Therapy Gone Right, we are two actual therapists who help clients on a daily basis. Contact us if you'd like to learn more about our work or want to hire us. You can find Lindsay at relationshipmatterstx.com or Brandy at sellerscounseling.com. Our show email is realtherapygonewrong@gmail.com. That's real, REEL. If you're making a movie or TV show and you do not want to find your show on our podcast, we are available to consult on your project. So get in touch. Until next
Bye.
time, bye.